I think I've always been wired for risk, and I say that, and I think about it differently. And that's always been an intriguing subject for me, as I talk to other people and trying to figure out, hey, like why don't they take risk? Why do they have no risk? And I think for me, I look back and I say, man, I came from nothing.
The Move Entrepreneur Evolved podcast. Get on it.
And we're back with another episode of the Moved Entrepreneur Evolved podcast. For anybody that's about to watch this episode, make sure that you like and subscribe. Also go back, even though I'm super excited about this guest that we're about to have. We have amazing guests that are on this podcast. Make sure you go back, take a look at them. We've got short form reels. We've got it all there to make everything enjoyable for you. So today's guest, I am super excited about. Not only do we have someone that's running a solar company, somebody that has a podcast, but he's also an incredible guy, a consultant, and I've got my man, Jacob Jones. What's up, dude?
What's up, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
excited
man.
To get going here.
I'm excited too, man. I'm excited too. We were just talking about in the green room. We were talking about getting sunlight in our eyes and talking about these things that we have these small little life ailments, and we're like, how do we fix them? So we dove right in a minute ago. But I'm gonna pull this thing back a little bit, and I always try to do a little bit of my homework. And I think that I would say with a little bit of confidence, business, but you also have kind of a sports mind, don't you?
Oh, for sure. Everything's a competition. I think that, man, I can trace that back to when I was just a kiddo. Competition was king in our house. Didn't matter what we were playing. It could have been Monopoly, Chutes and Ladders, or man, if two cockroaches, we were probably finding a way to bet on them bad boys running scurrying across the living room. So with that it's a beautiful lesson. It's one thing I show my kids as well. Like, we were never allowed to win unless we actually won. So in all fairness, like, I got my rear end kicked, drug across the floor, probably the first 8-10 years of my life. But I'll tell you what, that first win felt good. And so I relayed that to my kids, and we play Uno in our house. So Uno is
love me some Uno.
Huge piece. We've got our own rules. The only rules is the rules only exist if you get caught. So, you may get kids that are laying down 3-4 cards at a time, or wrong cards, flipping cards, trading cards. It gets wild because everybody's trying to figure out, hey, how are you trying to get over? So just a little bit fun in that. So
that's an interesting. I'm gonna pull that back. That's a little cover we have here, and there was a statement that someone said. And they had been talking about kind of the elections, and we won't make this a political thing, but they were talking about the election. The person was talking about, hey, was the election stolen? What was the process for that? And the person brought up a really good analogy, and they said, if you're younger and you had to go play like a basketball game, and the game was to win $100,000, and you got one shot at it, do you think you'd be trying to cheat?
Hey, I'll put it this way. In baseball, they got this new rule, right, with the pitch clock. So I'm watching this baseball game the other night, and it's the Cardinals and the Red Sox. And Red Sox are up 2 runs in the ninth, and they've got one of the best closers in baseball. So he's standing on the mound, but he's notoriously slow in what he does. And the hitter had found out this weakness. So the hitter would bring up his bat, and he had 1 foot inside the batter's box, 1 foot out. So the pitcher, only looks at from the waist up. So he doesn't see that other foot is not in the batter's box yet. So he begins his motion, which is against the rules with the new pitch clock. So, it's automatic ball. And within, 5 pitches, this happened 3 times, and the pitcher was so frazzled, loses the game. And, my point to that, and my point, whether it's the election or us playing Uno, is yes, there are certain rules that exist, but understand somebody made up those rules to be in their favor. So in business, if you're playing by everybody else's rules, you're probably going to lose, right? And kind of that same piece in life. Now, there's a difference between ethical and unethical.
I thought that's a really good conversation to have. But here's the thing that I learned about life and about business is that your ethics and your morals will be different than mine.
Yeah.
And
no, for sure.
I continue to learn this, and that life, we don't have the same morals. And many times we turn into, why would you not do that? And in their minds, like, well, that's not the way that I look at the world. How do you handle that? Because I think that as you're instilling this, I like that you're doing that, by the way. I think that's very interesting. You're not encouraging them to cheat. You're encouraging them to think outside the box, and that life is not about the perfect solution. It's about moving the next rock. And sometimes you got to keep doing it. And I don't think you're trying to teach them don't get caught. I think you're trying to teach them, how do I look at this situation and how do I win? Because there's many cases where mistakes are made and then the person makes it through. I think that's an interesting philosophy. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, I'll tackle it from this angle, because my wife actually just had this conversation, or a similar one, this week with some girlfriends. So they were sitting around and asking, hey, why do you not force your kids to do this or this? And it really comes down to our philosophy. Our philosophy in parenting is pretty simple. It's to teach our kids to think for themselves and to how to make solid decisions. So we, really talk about, hey, what is that decision-making process? Give them the tools, give them the parameters, but let them make the decision. Now, they're going to make some wrong ones. They're going to learn from them. They're going to screw up. They're going to learn from those things. But then there's also that ownership part, where I think you were really hitting on this or scratching the surface a little bit. Where we dive in there is, and this started early in our house, where a kid would say, hey, my sibling, they made me angry. We would just redirect that, like, hey, no, they don't have control over how you react. You chose to be angry. You may not have liked what they did, what they said to you, how they treated you, but you chose to respond in that way. So they understand real quick that, hey, I get to choose my actions. I don't get to choose my consequences. So, like then that. Really unpacking, the piece to, man, how do we get them to think for themselves? Because I'm constantly telling them, hey, there's a day, mom or dad, we're not going to be here. And I say the same thing in my business and the businesses that I coach in. It's that same piece. It's almost the very first thing I'm teaching a young leader or a business owner is, let's go make mistakes. And they look at me like, what? I said, yes, let's go make mistakes. Let's go make every mistake that we can. Now, it comes with a caveat. Then that caveat is simply, hey, let's not make the same mistake twice. Let's only make it once. Let's learn from it. Let's go make another mistake. I'm gonna pull you off that. This is interesting. And I'm gonna kind of interject for an interesting thing. And I think that this is important for people to watch, is that people's philosophies don't change. I think that once you anchor into something, it's something you can continue. And I'm going to take you back, because what you're saying, I'm going to reiterate it. This is exactly what you said. It was in 2015 in December. And you said, this right here, encourage mistakes. It's part of growth. MACC, massive action, constant correction. Yep. That's something we hit on. Every guy that's in my company, man, they've heard that more times than they probably care to admit, right? And really what that's born out of is not being afraid to take action. Or if I put it another way, Jason, would be, I want to free people up, not just to fail. I want them to, have that freedom to excel, right? So there's no fear of failure, but there's a desire to succeed. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's a difference there, right? Is I'm not setting them up saying, hey, you're going to fail because you're going to fail to learn. And that's that constant correction piece, right? Is, hey, I want to take action. See, so many people in life, in business, in ministry, I don't care what your walk of life is. That's the problem, right? Is they don't take the action. They come right up against it. They know what to do. They know what they should be doing, but they don't take the action. And a lot of times that's, hey, I'm afraid to fail, but out of that failure, there's a lesson. So you gotta take the action, extract the lesson, both from the good and the bad, learn from it, right? Don't repeat the bad, repeat the good. So what did I take stock of that and say, hey, what am I going to repeat? What am I going to throw away? Let's go make another hustle mistake, if you will. So that's always been king, one of the ways I like to teach that is I usually ask people, hey, or I'll just ask you since we're sitting here. So we have a race. So you're watching the Olympics. Most important step in the race.
What's the most important step?
Yep.
Well, I'm gonna go with the first one.
Yeah. See, and this is actually what they even teach athletes. And 99% of the time, that's the answer I get. But Jason, if we lined up and you took,
I felt like I got loaded into that question. I feel like
you
I
did
was
a little
loaded.
bit. You did. You take the first step, and that's the only step you take. There's a problem, right? So that last step is actually the most important step. It's where the winner's crowned. And I go through, right? And you say, hey, and that massive access consequence, this is kind of that piece to that. Like, yes, you've got to get started, but you also got to finish. And what I love about and what really set me on that road was Walt Disney. Walt Disney, what most people don't know about Walt Disney is he went out there in La La Land in Southern California, and he wanted to purchase land to make Disneyland. And he got told no. So he went to another bank. He got told no. He went to a third bank. He got told no. He went to a 50th bank. He got told no. He went to 172nd bank. He got told no. He went to bank number 250. He got told no. He went to bank 300, and they told him no. 301 times before somebody said yes. And you think about that, right? And just in life, the only thing I'm guilty of is just getting no's. So whether it's in the sales world, whether it's in life, I just keep asking and asking and asking until it finally turns into a yes. So if you imagine that perseverance, if Walt Disney didn't have it, how many millions of little kids would go home with, frowns, on their face each year because they didn't get to go see some stranger in a Mickey Mouse costume?
Yeah.
So, which is also kind of strange, but that's a whole nother story.
Hey, I think I'm on the same play on that. I think Disney, some parts of it's a little strange, but I got to tell you, growing up in Southern California, and I've been to the Florida Epcot Center as well, there's nothing like a kid, right? I mean, you go to Disneyland, everything that you watched on television, it comes alive. I mean, I guess that was the first world of holograms, right? Like, I'm going to hologram this cartoon that you've been living with, and now you're going to be able to meet them. I want to come back a little bit. I know that we unpacked this a little bit earlier, and I think that through this process, you've got these three things that you're doing. And obviously, we run the podcast. You've now started a podcast, and I was honored to come and hang out with you on your podcast. And I think that the other one, and you do some consulting for small businesses, but I kind of want to go back and talk a little bit about what hooked you in the business world. Did you start off as a salesperson? Were you somebody that was doing operations and then said, look, I can transfer it from there? What was that kind of transition? Was it in your teens? Was it late 20s? What was that like for you, the foundation?
Yeah, so probably a little bit different. So I got in the sales game early 2000s. So here in Texas, energy is deregulated. So just like at home, everybody in the country gets to choose, who do I get my cable from or who do I get my cell phone from? In the state of Texas, since the early, basically for the last 20 plus years, we've been able to choose who is our electricity provider. So I entered an ad, 20 plus years ago, walked into an office and this interview, and it was like a cattle call. I walk in and there's 15 people in this room and I'm thinking, what is going on? And this very charismatic guy standing at the front of the room and he's talking about, hey, I've got these 3 jobs. And come to find out, by the way, 2 of the jobs didn't even exist. So only 1 even existed. So the whole thing was a sham from the beginning, just wild. But, I go after the 15, we sit down one-on-one. And the very first question he asked me is, or he didn't even ask, it was a comment. He says, hey, I've never hired anybody from Nebraska. So I grew up in Nebraska. And I just looked at him deadpan and said, that's because he never met anybody from Nebraska. And he looks at me, he says, great, training's tomorrow. And he starts giving me the time. And I'm thinking, I'm not coming. And he says, well, what do you mean you're not coming? I said, no offense, but anybody that ever came, knocked on my door where I grew up, it was the Jehovah's Witness. They ran him off, right? My dad ran him off, with the shotgun. But that was my understanding of, hey, what a door-to-door sales gig was. So I'm thinking, there's no way I'm coming back. So he says, hey, here's the letter anyways, and invites me to this training class. So I go home, no intention of showing back up, but you can probably guess where I showed back up the following day. So I show up, and it gets even stranger because it's 1 to 9 p.m. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday on the training class, and I'm thinking, who does this? So we're there till 9 p.m. the first night, and the guy says, hey, who wants advanced training? And I'm thinking, man, I'm new. I'll take some advanced training. Why not? So we jump in his car, me and two other guys, and he takes us to a bar. Now my mind's spinning because I'm thinking, what's going on here? But Jason, here's what I tell you: is that what unfolded from basically 9:30 to 2 a.m. last call was the best sales training I've ever gotten in my life. So and your listeners are probably sitting here saying, what? But really what it was. So alcohol, as we know, acts as an inhibitor. So when you have a couple drinks, people slowly let out what they really are, who they are,
inhibition.
How they act.
You let go of the inhibitions. Ego is dropped. You end up standing on top of the bar naked. But I mean, I'm just saying these things happen.
Yeah. No, we saw them. For sure. But that was the training. The training was, hey, I want you guys to watch how people act and interact with one another. So we were learning the psychological side of sales very, very unconventionally, but we were learning them. Mm-hmm. So it was, a great process. I come back day 2 and I'm thinking, I don't even know what to expect. Mm-hmm. So day 2, we're not even learning a sales pitch. We're literally learning motions. And to this day, 20 plus years later, I can do the entire sales pitch, the motions, the gestures that went with it, like pure greatness. And all of them had, some type of psychological effect. So we were learning deep sales, but he had simplified this so easy. So again, not a great, in all transparency, probably not the greatest human being, but phenomenal sales, mentor. So broken the sales game, with them, and didn't take me long. I was outproducing everybody, in the office. Then I started outproducing entire teams. So after about 6 months, I stumbled into this group from St. Louis. It was the guys that built and sold Charter Cable. So they built Fortune 50 company from nothing, turned around and sold it off to Paul Allen, who's Bill Gates' partner in Microsoft. Yeah. So they were starting a door-to-door sales company. I was employee number 3, beat the lights on. So showed up and helped take that company from 0 million to 25 million in revenue. And the great part, with that, Jason, was it afforded me 2 things. One, it was an education in every area of business. I got to learn sales. I got to learn operations, the finance, the recruiting, the HR, everything there, and the importance of systems. So they filled in a lot of operational gaps, if you will. And so that was great on that aspect. And I, about 10 years in, again, great education for a decade, but got tired of paying other VPs kids through school, paying for their college. So I partnered up with a company that was a guy that was about to go out of business in the state of Florida and helped scale that from 0 to 15 million. So, we got that baby off the ground and cooking and systemized. And then, we had 100 plus salespeople when the pandemic hit. And where the pandemic hurt us, Jason, was all of our contracts, our guys were out on the doors. So we literally lost our contracts, said, hey, you can't go out there and obviously visit people at home during the pandemic. So we had to lay off 100 plus salespeople. So that was a tough gig there. And so I left there, kind of started the solar company, and really started to learn all the digital marketing, things of that nature. And from there, it's just been a journey. And, I've got the solar company, and that thing pretty much operates and is systemized on itself today as well.
Dude, that's such a good story. You kind of want to pull back a little bit. And I think this is something maybe I'll open the door as well. And maybe I've told this story before. And it sounds like it was kind of was your same situation. And that is, when you're young, you are brought up in, maybe there's different ways that you're brought up. Maybe you're loved by certain people. Mine always was like, oh, my mom loves me, And I remember being in a scenario where I went out and I was going to get my first sales job. And I remember walking into this place and it was like, okay, well, training's tomorrow, kind of the same scenario. It's like, oh, okay, training's tomorrow. I'm like, okay, well, come back tomorrow. And I remember walking in and it was only two of us. It wasn't as big of a thing, but we went in the back and we sat down. And he stopped and he looked straight at us, right to the face, and says, Jason, I could tell you're a really nice guy, but if you can't be okay with someone not liking you because you're a piece of shit, then this probably isn't for you. And this was around kind of the same time that you're talking about. I was right around that time, 2099. And I think that at that moment, I'll never forget, he goes, people aren't going to like you. And in my first thing, I was like, that's not what I was taught. My mama loves me. I'm like, why would I do that? But the mindset that he put into me was that it's not about that emotion of them liking you. It's about positioning yourself for them to get what they want. And once I was able to kind of realize that, I was like, okay, so I can go out there and act a certain way because I'm not trying to get them to like me. I'm getting them to buy something. And once he kind of turned that in my head, I became a savage. But it was a mindset change. It was literally a shift. Did you have that kind of same experience? It sounds like it was like, whoa, that shift that your brain has to change.
I think here's the thing. Even from the beginning, everything was highly systemized. So it really took the emotion out. And that was kind of the beauty, because it was even explained to me, right? That, hey, here's how many people you're going to talk to. Here's what's going to happen. This many are going to do this. This many are going to do that. And then there was almost this challenge. Go try to disprove it. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of set out that way in the beginning, but I just did the action. The one thing that I could control, right, is, hey, how many people I talk to, and literally everything else lined up. So I say that, and what I tell people today is, I'm not going to pretend that things don't exist. Racism, hey, people liking you, not liking you, but here's what I understood early on. And I think it was a blessing, and I hope that everybody catches this, is those things do exist. But those people, when that shows up at your front doorstep, realize it was not about you. Like, that was imparted in them when they were knee-high, some kid running around. Somebody didn't teach them right. You just got the brunt of it. Mm-hmm. So if you can, take that emotion out of that, and you realize that, hey, whatever this person, whatever they say to me, whatever happens in this scenario, it's not truly about me, it's about them. Things go a whole lot smoother.
Yeah.
And it's the emotion that kills us, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm always trying to get people to understand you cannot be a slave to your emotions. You can't be a slave to your feelings. You've got to take ownership of those things. And that doesn't excuse other people. It doesn't excuse, ugliness or whatever it is we face, but you can't control that. So a good, great mentor of mine always said, hey, we get to control how we react to things. We don't get to control how people react to us. Or that's, as I said earlier with the kiddos, right? You get to choose your actions, but not the consequences. So it's just
such a powerful thing of response, right? And that's taking responsibility of the way you respond to things. I think that working in sales, we both kind of came from that original cloth that really puts you in a good advantage. I made a joke when I was younger because I sold cars. That was my first thing. And if you're going door to door and you're knocking, that's kicking your butt too. But once you realize two things, and this is something maybe you realize, it was like they're gonna buy it from someone else if I don't sell it to them. that's when I realized, well, you might as well do the thing that that's going to pull them to buy it, because someone's going to sell this to them. Might as well be me.
Well, yes. And that factor is huge. And that's one we obviously, hey, was imparted on you, and one that we train on as well, is if you believe, hey, you've got a product, and that product or that service helps someone, they're going to get it somewhere. The question is, are they going to get it from you? Mm-hmm. And that's the truth of it. And all that is understanding, hey, people buy because there's a gap. And it's widening up what is that gap. There's two things that move people to make a decision. There's either a pain or there's a pleasure. And I'd love to tell everybody listening and watching that most people do that for pleasure, but that's not the case. Most people move because of pain, because they're either in a spot where it hurts so bad, or they won't move because it doesn't hurt enough yet. So my job was always make the pain so great. And this is, anybody that we audit their sales, program and talk about this, it's almost backwards from what they probably traditionally learned, because, they've got some fancy pitch, and I don't have a fancy pitch. Mm-hmm. And the reason I don't have a fancy pitch is we've got to deal in the pain. And until the pain's bad enough, we don't even get to talk about our product or service. So, hey, if we can accomplish that in 30 seconds, great. If that takes 30 minutes, great. But we need to understand, that pain has to be ratcheted up so much that prospect is almost begging us for a solution. Because here's one thing I've learned through sales and in life is people don't really care what the solution is. The solution has to work, because that's what's going to get them to keep coming back. But what people don't want is a problem. You stop and you think about that in your own life. When there's a problem, first thing that comes to mind is, how do I get rid of this, or how do I forget about it? Yeah. And so it's figuring out, hey, that problem, what is the problem, and how is that problem so big that they have to take action on it today? Because then they're open to almost any solution that makes sense. And I couple it with this, and then I'll get off the sales high horse. But one of the things I always use as an example is, there's never been one thing in the history of mankind that has ever been bought based on logic. Hopefully people let that sink in. Yet we try to sell everything logically. And I say that, right? So we buy with emotion and we justify with logic. So if we look, each look and say, hey, that shirt that we have on today, you may have walked into the, wherever you bought it. What you didn't ask that salesperson was, hey, where's the cheapest shirt you have in here? So it wasn't a price issue. Price mattered that you could afford it. Right. And then you justified with price and with logic that, hey, maybe it was on sale. Maybe it was last season's whatever. So you got a deal on it, but you bought it because you thought it looked good on you. And I always tell people, hey, we can disagree on, whether it looks good on you or not, but you bought it because it looked good. Nobody walked in anywhere and says, hey, give me the cheapest car on the car lot. Otherwise you'd walk out with, a lemon. Right. So it's important that, hey, they see them. And the way that I kind of figured that out is, we were blessed to have a Lamborghini dealership next to one of my sales offices. And it always blew my mind, because at that dealership, they had a lot just like a Chevy dealership, but there were no cars on it. It's just this big empty lot. And inside they had, 3 or 4 models, one of each. And they would sit in there, and the guy would talk to you about it, like, hey, well, what color do you like? I like it in red. Well, would you like this or this option? Well, this option. He'd be like, great. Just keep looking around. Next thing you know, and I don't know where, it's like they magically came out of somewhere. He would pull around the red with the leather. Every spec that you had, all of a sudden was sitting in front of the building. And then he'd put you in the car and you go driving off. And so I'm talking to the sales guy, and he says, I've never sold a car in my life. I'm thinking, oh, you seem pretty successful. And he says, no, he says, what I sell is an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once
you're in that car.
I worked for Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I was able to recognize that people really do buy this idea. And Harley Davidson is a great example, because the more that I realized that really what they were trying is a couple of things. One is they're trying to be like their grandfather that was in war at the time. This is a few years back. They're like, oh, my grandfather had a Harley. So they have a story, right? Oh, I could be like my grandfather. And then the other one is I could be a badass, right? Weekend warrior. You know, on Sundays, I'm going to put on my vest and I'm going to show up on this motorcycle and people are going to think I could fight and, all that stuff. Or it might be someone that's, maybe they're single or whatever. And I'm going to impress my friends by having a girl on my bike. I mean, these things are psychologically engraved. It obviously is, once I turn the throttle and I have all that loud noise, people are going to recognize me, status, right? And so I think that once I figured that out, I went, man, they would always make fun of me because they'd always be like, Jason, you don't know nothing about the motor. I was like, I don't need to know anything about the motor. It doesn't matter. They're like, what do you mean? I said, it doesn't matter, because it was only 5 to 7% of the people that came in and said, I'm buying it because of this new motor that came out. It was people that came in and said, I have this experience that I want to fill. And now this is the motorcycle that fills that experience for me. Oh, what is it that would work for me? And then that's when you start to kind of play something. So I could see where you're coming from on that. People really do make those decisions. Emotionally, they make the decision, and then logically would be like, hey, it's really funny you say that, because it would be like, oh, logically, can you make the payment? Oh, and then if they were like, oh, I don't know, I'd be like, hey, what would be going on? If they're like, oh, I don't know, then you would go back to, oh, hey, if you have this motorcycle, you probably won't be going on as many vacations because you guys could ride the bike everywhere. And then in their mind, they're going, oh, yeah, vacations. And now they're off in La La Land. Okay, let's do it.
Jason, we do it with our cell phones. Everybody listening here, right? It's, hey, you want the latest iPhone or the latest Android, depending if you're a cell phone or an iPhone or Android person. But it's the same concept. You're after that experience that gives you. It's funny because people could care less if they got their service from AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile, right? Until they have a drop call and they want to switch somewhere else. So they justify it, right, with the price, the logic, everything else. But the experience of that phone, and Apple's a great
example
proponent of that, example. So, Starbucks, all of that. You stop and you think it's people buy experiences all the time, but so many companies are out there and they're trying to sell that, hey, I've got this price, or I've got the lower price, or I've got that. And I'm always educating folks. I've never been the lowest price. And as I tell anybody, and we train our guys on, it's you kind of get three. You can have the lowest price. You could have the best experience, or you could have the best product. So you can pick one, maybe two of those, but you don't get all three. Because the best product and the best experience isn't going to come with the lowest price. So, once you get buyers to understand that, price gets thrown out the window. All of a sudden,
it really does.
And we see it all the time in our solar business, where we go in and we're $5,000-$10,000 more expensive than the other bids, but they go with us because of the experience and because of the quality. So when they understand that, hey, here's what you're getting, here's what you're buying, that's king. And the other guy, hey, it was all about price, and he was giving you Walmart equipment. No problem. You get Walmart equipment, you get the Walmart price, you're probably going to have a Walmart experience.
Now, I know that you went through solar, and it sounds like you kind of cut your teeth on sales, and obviously you learned through the process and emotional sales and doing all those things. But then there came a point where you now had to run a business, and that transition from sales to operational standpoint, how did you handle that?
Yeah, and that's where I said I was blessed from early on, because even going back to mid 2000s, I ran divisions, and I was responsible for the P&L, the operations, the recruiting. I mean, nuts and bolts for the business. So I was basically running a business inside of a business. So, I had great mentors, with that. So by the time I went and did that to myself, I'd already been doing it for years and years and years. So nothing was new in that regard. I think the one part is, hey, you don't have anybody to fall back on. That was probably the biggest piece. But one thing I've always done, Jason, is everything for me is a system. And it's, hey, how do I make it simpler and simpler and simpler? And a lot of folks go and they complicate. And I always use, my youngest is 12, and I call her my litmus test. If I want to teach something, I go to my 12-year-old.
Well, you better put that fairy dust, so she could stay young. I'm telling you, I tried it on a bunch of kids. They kept growing, man. That thing's a bunch of bullshit. I tried it. Stay young.
But here's the thing: if it's going to be reproducible, it's got to be simple. And that's what most people miss, right? And their business or, their sales or their operations, none of it's reproducible. It all hinges on, some talented person, because it's not reduced to the ridiculous. Yes. Can a 12-year-old do it? And if a 12-year-old can do it, now we can reproduce it. Now we can build a system out of it. So that's just always me is, hey, we run into friction. How do I take this friction away? I always, tell leaders and companies, your job is to make the people you have the privilege to lead their lives easier. How do you remove roadblocks? How do you get rid of red lights? So how do we go simple, simple, simple? And that's just always been my mantra.
I think that's really good. I think that one of the questions I've had, what's your thoughts on solar moving forward? We've got a lot of, especially out here in California, we're supposed to have some incentives that we're going to be dropping off. How is that happening out there?
Yeah, so every state's different. So I operate in 3 states: Texas, Oklahoma, and Florida. And each one of those has its own challenge, its own, different regulations. So I think that, when I look at it, now's the best time, for a homeowner to go solar or someone to invest in solar. And I say that, like here in Texas, our legislators that have been tied and had their hands in the pockets of the big energy companies for decades, they're passing legislation to, bring on more and more, more and more coal, nuclear, natural gas plants. As I tell people, it's a recipe for disaster. And I say that it's good for them. I mean, here's what happens, and here's how I always tell people, hey, why solar? What we're doing today is not sustainable. And why it's not sustainable, there's a couple reasons. That first one is the game plan across the country, and especially here in Texas, is to dig something up, light it on fire so you can watch Netflix and chill. So the problem with that is it's a natural resource. So if you learned anything in school in economics, what you've got to come to grips with is the more that we dig up and light on fire, the less there is. So now there's a higher demand, this whole supply and demand. So the price has to go up. There's less of it. It's more valuable. So that's going to drive up prices. That second is population. As more and more people and we use more and more, electricity, that's going to drive up the cost because, hey, now we've got less of it, but we've got a higher demand. So, when that supply meets the demand, it just has to go up. And then you add in politicians on top of it that, again, you're greasing each other's pockets. It gets even worse, right? Because, hey, I've got to protect them because they're the ones that are donating to, my campaign.
And they write the laws. I mean, those guys are writing the laws,
yeah.
And those are the ones that are lobbying for, regulation and Yep.
So when you look at it, This isn't just, that we're talking the solar industry, but this happens in many industries.
Yeah, for sure.
It just happens in the energy industry. There's billions and billions of dollars. And here's what we know is without renewables. So, we talk, hydro, we talk, solar from the sun or wind. Without those, America couldn't keep the lights on. It's the only thing that's keeping it affordable. Homeowners and business owners really have two choices because, whether you believe in solar, whether you, believe in helping the environment or not, all of that's irrelevant. I know you're going to have some solar guys that listen here and I just debunked their entire sales pitch, but but here's the thing at the end of the day is that's irrelevant. I don't care if you believe in solar. I don't care if you believe it helps the planet, hurts the planet. I don't care. Here's your options, and here's where the rubber meets the road. You have solar now, and most homeowners are thinking, "Huh?" And well, your utility company is building solar farms. They're building solar. Yeah. Yep. Well, who do you think's paying for that? You are in the form of rate increases. So you really have two options. You can continue to pay, and do what you're doing, and you can continue to pay them to build solar, or you could pay for your own, and you get the benefit because right now they're getting the tax break.
It's the Bitcoin of energy.
It is. They're getting the tax break. You're paying them to build solar farms where you could pay that. You could get the tax break. And not only that is, hey, however long, whether you pay cash or you finance it over 10, 15, 20, 25 years, you also have an end date. And this is what I tell every homeowner or business owner. Hey, if we're looking at a 15-year loan product as an example, we'll just tell them, hey, let's call your current electricity company. And let's just tell them, propose this, that how about right now you freeze my rate for forever. And then at the end of, 15 years, you never send me a bill again. And if they take you up on that offer, run, because that's what we're talking about here. And what a homeowner needs to understand, or just anybody needs to understand, is where it doesn't affect you. And this goes back to the pain, right? Where you want to create that pain. So here they don't feel it right now. So what I want to talk about is, hey, here's what it's going to cost you. How much do you have in your 401k? Because here's what we know is every 10 years, electricity rates double. So if you're paying $300 now, you're going to pay $600. You're going to pay $1,200. It's like clockwork. It's been that way for the last 40 years. So when you retire, how are you going to pay the electric bill? Like that's a real question. We need to discuss that. So before we even start talking about solar, I need to understand, how are you going to afford this? Do you have enough in your 401k? Are you going to sell? You got a rental property you can sell?
Yeah.
Are you going to have to? You're going to have to take out a second, third mortgage just to keep the lights on?
Well, and at that level, even if you did it, if it was $300, you got $3,600. You can even math out, hey, if you're retired, you got 5 years, you've got yourself almost $20,000.
Yep. And then we reverse it, right? We
reverse it.
Yeah, we talk about, hey, now all this savings, what can you do over the next 15, 20, 25 years, So, so again, going back to that is solar, solar is inevitable, at the end of the day. The real question is, are you going to pay for yours?
Are you going to own it, or are they going to sell it back to you?
Correct.
Now, I know one thing that we talked about, and I kind of wanted to get on this, and you have a consulting with small businesses, and I know that you have a background in sales. And I think that the reason that you go in on the sales first when you work with somebody is because that's a really good win. If you could go in and you could say, hey, by the way, I fixed your IT problem. Ain't nobody going to be jumping around. They're going to be like, oh, great, you fixed it. Thanks for fixing my IT. But if you go in there and you add revenue to the business, you become the farmer. You help them become, the person that's going to be able to bring home food to the family. And when you do that, what is the next thing that you like to look at?
Yeah. For us, everything goes hand in hand. Here's what I find is we go in, and yes, sales is the easy one. I've built sales teams for years and years, and have got that down to a science. And who doesn't? I never met a company that doesn't want more revenue, regardless who they are, right?
Or a better running salesman.
But what you understand when you get in there is everything is tied to sales, and that's what a lot of companies miss, right? So we get in there and we talk about, hey, why did you hire this guy? Oh, well, he was charismatic. And what people would probably find interesting, or it would shock them, is I actually prefer to hire introverts for sales positions. And that's probably a little bit wild, because everybody thinks, hey, I want the guy that's an extrovert, gifted gab, but usually what you don't get there is a whole lot of empathy. They want to talk over and they want to win a conversation, where that introvert is high on the empathy scale. So we can teach them sales techniques, how to have a good conversation and go that route. But what I'm hitting on there is, now we're talking recruiting. Now we're talking staffing. Then we start to talk, from that point, we begin to look at their systems, their tracking systems, their CRM. Now we're into the operations. Now we start to talk about, hey, their comp plans. We're into the finance, and what they begin to see, all the way down to marketing. Like, hey, you're getting the wrong leads in to talk to your salespeople. Like, you're wasting their time and you're wasting money here because you don't even understand who your ideal customer is. Yeah. So, we begin to break that down. Sales is the heart of that, because it's what pumps out revenue, right? And
you get the most data.
Something. Yes, but it's literally tied to everything. And and what I see often, and I learned this because one of my largest clients for 17 years was AT&T. I used to tell the joke that, man, they could go in tomorrow and lay off everybody with a social security number that ended in 5 and not miss a beat. They've got that much fat. I was down at when SBC's headquarters was in San Antonio. I went down there for a meeting, and I'm talking to the guy in the meeting, and there's somebody else that I had a relationship with AT&T, and I asked him, hey, can you point me to their office, where they are in this building? And he says, oh yes, I know her. We're on calls twice a week. And I'm thinking, awesome. And he says, well, yeah, she's out in California. And I'm scratching my head thinking, I swore she was based out of San Antonio. And so we end our meeting, and I'm walking on to the elevator, literally, Jason, on the same floor. I look over, here's this lady's desk. Now, mind you, they're on the same team. They have calls twice a week. They work on the same floor and did not know each other. And what that taught me was that, hey, even these Fortune 5 companies are so disconnected from one part of the business to the other. And so learning that, like, it doesn't surprise me that a small business is equally as messed up. So, to answer, hey, sales is the easy way in, because that's the heart of the business. It's where, hey, we're pumping out revenue, everything can grow. Plus it's selfish, right? Because, hey, if I can create more revenue, that's more that you can pay me to do other things.
I've always said, at least this happened to me. It was like, the sales are like the rose, like if you can go get more sales, the rose is beautiful. It looks great. But the problem is if the rose starts to die, there's thorns on the actual stem. And so as you get your sales and you can start getting yourself into some momentum, now you got to go back and clean those operations up so that you can sustain the momentum that you created. And I see quite often is they'll stay on that. And I was guilty of it too in my first businesses, is that I just only stayed on sales. And I was like, we can fix the problem with sales, And yes, you can, but really you mask it. You mask it with sales. So you have to kind of go back and then layer those pieces of communication, which is, I think, what you laid out. What do you think is the passion, or what inspired you to get into business and to take the risk that you take?
Yeah, I think I've always been wired for risk, and I say that, and I think about it differently. And that's always been an intriguing subject for me, as I talk to other people and trying to figure out, hey, like, why don't they take risk? Why do they have no risk? And I think for me, I look back and I say, man, I came from nothing. Yeah, like I said, I had my parents were both 17 when they had me. So they both worked at McDonald's. So if you think McDonald's pays a lot today, rewind to the late 70s. You probably figure out we didn't have a lot. We learned how to eat, potatoes every way you can imagine. But yeah, the thing with that is because I came from nothing, and because even coming up, like, man, I found ways to blow more money than I spent early on in my career. Early 20s, worst thing you can do is let somebody go out and make 150, 200 grand a year. Yeah.
I was doing that I was 24 years old. Yeah.
You don't know what to do with it. That's one piece, hey, they nobody ever taught me early on was like, hey, what do you do with this money? How do you make that money work for you? How do you invest it? I had none of that. So I went through cycles early on where, man, I would make great money, but at the end of the year, I'd look around and be like, man, what do I got to show for it? And I tie that to the risk because the one thing about me is I'm not afraid to lose it all. That there's zero fear in my body about that because I know that tomorrow I can wake up and create something else. Like I have that much belief, and that fear of losing doesn't exist for me. And because that doesn't exist for me, it may drive my wife crazy at times, but because it doesn't exist for me, for sure, I just have a higher tolerance, for risk. Like to me, there's a calculated risk and there's a dumb risk. And fortunately, I've been able to, figure out those differences over time.
I think it's like when you climb the rock and then you're going to have to jump off something into the river. And you're like calculating, you're like, can I take that much pain? You're like, okay, I could do this. It's a weird way to calculate it. Dude, this has been an awesome podcast, man. How do people find you? How do they learn more about you? How do they find you?
Yeah, so simplest place is, head over to greenlighttheory.com and you can find all my social, everything from there. That's the easiest entry point.
My friend, my man, Jacob, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. When you get a chance, go back. If you're catching this on a short, make sure you like and subscribe. And also go back and look at the other guests because they have awesome stories just like Jacob. Jacob, thank you very much for being on the Move podcast. And I really appreciate it. People are going to love what you have to say. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, brother. Had a blast.
If you like this episode, make sure you smash the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just like Nike is to athletes, Moved is to entrepreneurs.